These are the six fundamental questions that lead to a gateway of greater consciousness within oneself. These are questions that are fundamental to life and every aspect of awareness that surrounds us. But these questions are critical if one's looking for answers. Who am I? What am I? Where am I? And so follows. Welcome to episode 1 of Bands and the Humans podcast. I'm your humble and gracious host, Bands, and you are the humans. Today we're going to be talking a bit about philosophy, what it is, where it came from, where it exists today, and how it can help us in our daily lives today. Because it's an ancient practice, but we still have to question whether it's relevant today and relevant to the problems, and whether it can come up with solutions for our problems today. So let's get right into it. Firstly, you want to know what philosophy is. And basically, philosophy is the study of those fundamental questions: the what, who, what, when, how, why. I probably said one of those questions twice, but the six fundamental questions. And it's a study of those questions which leads to a greater awareness of our existence and what knowledge is and the values that we hold, the morals that come from those values, and the reasons for having those things, and just basically the mind and language. And philosophy is just a tool of contemplation for all these things that surround us, and just to give us a greater sense of knowledge and wisdom about these things that exist within ourselves that we may not ever look into. So philosophy does that. It opens up all these passages in our minds and in our brains that, because the mind and the brain are two separate entities that exist in different planes. But then you'd have to contemplate that philosophically in order to gain a greater understanding, because you can't really say what it is and what it's not, because you can only get so much of the answer right. We can't truly define where the mind is, because we know where the brain is, but then we've never seen the brain, but then we know it's there. But how do you know your brain is actually there? So those are questions that philosophy opens up to. And another aspect of philosophy is that it is a love of wisdom. And what is wisdom? What does it mean to be wise? Well, for me personally, I believe that there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. And the difference there lies with that knowledge are all the things that we know. So any piece of information that you may have is a form of knowledge. So you may know about politics, but wisdom comes in as you knowing what to do with that knowledge and applying it, in a way that is productive and effective. So if you look at the word wisdom, you can break it down into wise dome, like a wise mind, like dome meaning head. So a wise head. So that's how you would look at that word if you try to break it down in order for you to understand it better, or in order for it to be taken down into smaller chunks for easier consumption or digestion when it comes to understanding it. So it's wise dome. That's what philosophy is, and hopefully that clears up any questions that you guys might have or have. But if you do still have a few more questions about it, then just comment down below in the comment section and leave me with some questions. I enjoy having to sit down and read and think about stuff that people ask, because that's what most philosophical minds do. We ask questions. We ask the questions and we answer them to the best of our ability, obviously. So shoot some questions at me if that wasn't clear enough. But I just want to take a look at where philosophy exists in our world, either today or in ancient times. So you obviously have your Eastern philosophy, you have your Middle Eastern philosophy, you have your East Asian philosophy, you have the African philosophy, and indigenous American philosophy. And this just goes to show that philosophy was a practice or an idea that was widespread across the world and practiced all over because of how essential it is to our living, basically. We all need to be a bit curious at some point. Some people, it's sad that some people do die without ever having that revelation to them, or just that realization that there's more to this existence than what we see, and they never get to ask those questions like, who am I really? Because if I had to ask you, who are you, you would probably give me a name, but that's not who you are. That's who you were told you are. Your name is something that was handed down to you, same as your ID number, because your name might just be a reflection of a numerical value in a computer. That's how they generate ID numbers. So if someone had to ask you, who are you really? What would your answer be? Would it still be your name? And what are you? A human? It's ironic I bring that up because the podcast is called Bands and Humans. And you are humans, the most beautiful kind of humans. But that's not all you are. That's the conquest of life, is to find out who or what we truly are. And when you do find all these things out, a greater responsibility comes now, where you have to find out where you are. To find out where you are, you have to find out when. Now it includes time, metaphysics. That's a different topic though. The last question we ask ourselves is why we are. Why am I who I am? Why am I here? And all these other questions. So it keeps opening itself up. It's almost like a flower blossoming into something greater than what it initially was. And that's how consciousness is. It constantly grows. It constantly blossoms into something more and more beautiful every single time we open, or every single time we touch on it. I want to read a little bit of a passage that I have from one of my thoughts on how philosophy can help us. Philosophy can help confront our innermost inhibitions. It can help one realize and identify the figures that battle within our consciousness. And the more we philosophize, the more light we shed on those aspects of ourselves that were blanketed by ego. And ego cannot survive in self-knowledge, only in ignorance. And that was just a thought I had, and I felt the need to write it down because of how moving or how influential that thought was, I felt at the time. Ego is something that we all develop as a tool for survival. It's a form of us developing aspects of ourselves and personality in order to set a form of stability within that. If I know who I am, I don't have to constantly go around figuring it out and changing who I am, because change is a scary thing for most people. And We don't want to experience that. So we'd rather stick to what we know, and that's what ego does. It prevents growth, it prevents change, it prevents a cycle rather. So it puts an end to who and when, why, how you are. So there's no room for philosophy, or there's no room to philosophize when ego is present. And like I said, that ego only works in ignorance. It cannot survive in self-knowledge, because once you know yourself, your ego dies. It becomes obsolete. It has no need to exist, because you realize that you are an ever evolving being, an ever evolving manifestation that is greater than what you presume yourself to be. So ego cannot hold on to that. It will die. It cannot live with you knowing that, which is why the pursuit of self-knowledge, the pursuit of know thyself, which comes from Hermetic philosophy, which is from ancient Egypt, also known as Kemet, from Hermes. Hermes is one of the earlier philosophers, way before Socrates, Plato. These are Greek philosophers, and Rene Descartes, Sun Tzu from the East Asian philosophy, Buddha. Everyone knows Buddha, Confucius, Nietzsche, Carl Jung. These are great thinkers and great minds that have existed within our time, and we have the great privilege of getting to know their works as they were documented. But some of the works were lost because people didn't know how to either read or write, or they just didn't have the privilege of getting to write down their thoughts. So that's why it's important for us now today to also document, because you basically stamping yourself in a frame of time. Now that we have sort of explored what philosophy is, how it can help us, and who exists in the philosophical circles, we set a basis for the remainder of what the podcast is to be. And I look forward to exploring more topics with you, and going into spirituality and meditation and all these other various topics. But I just wanted to start at philosophy because I believe that that is where the fundamental basis lies for all these other topics that we shall encounter. It starts with philosophy. It starts with why. It starts with you being curious. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your humble and gracious host, Bands, and you are the humans.